Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of absolute precision. It's kind of like engineering.
Right. It's very binary, which is, incredibly comforting.
Exactly. You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line on the bone, and the doctor just points at the screen and says, well, there it is.
We like our medical issues to be visible, like neatly categorized and boxed up.
Yeah, but then you step into the world of adolescent mental health and specifically eating disorders, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just totally useless. We're looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, frankly, incredibly murky.
Oh, absolutely. And the real danger here isn't just that the illness is complex. It's that the symptoms we are socially trained to look for are actually the wrong symptoms.
Yeah, for the majority of modern patients anyway. And since so many of you listening already follow mental health trends, you probably know eating disorders are complex. But welcome to today's deep dive, because we are unpacking a genuinely life-saving stack of research today.
We really are. And we aren't just going to look at the what today. We really need to dig into the why.
Right. Our mission is twofold here. We're going to dismantle these pervasive, often fatal myths about who gets eating disorders. And then we're going to explore a really fascinating systemic on-the-ground solution that's currently rolling out in Georgia schools.
Because we have to ask why our cultural scripts have gotten this so profoundly wrong for so long, and, how shifting our perspective from physical appearance to behavioral patterns can literally save lives.
Yeah, so if you're listening to this, and assuming you know what an eating disorder looks like, you're going to want to sit down for this. The realities we're looking at completely upend the traditional narrative.
They really do.
Let's start with the most dangerous barrier to treatment right out of the gate, which is the visual stereotype. Because, we can't solve a problem if we are fundamentally looking in the wrong place.
Exactly. We have this deeply ingrained cultural myth of the rich, white teenage girl disease.
Yes, that 1990s after-school special profile.
Right, which is an incredibly stubborn myth, but the data clearly shows that eating disorders happen at every single body size, across every gender, every race, and every economic background.
And holding on to that old myth is exactly what keeps the most vulnerable kids completely invisible to the medical system.
Oh, for sure.
Actually, one of the statistics from the sources that absolutely stopped me in my tracks was about boys. It said 1 in 3 people with an eating disorder is male.
Yeah.
Wait, 1 in 3. How is a demographic that represents over 30% of the patient population flying completely under the radar?
Well, it really comes down to how the behavior is culturally camouflaged. Boys are routinely missed because the script for young man changing his body is, it's often praised.
Like gym culture.
Exactly. Think about the pressure to bulk up or, get shredded. A teenage boy who becomes totally obsessed with protein intake, meticulously tracks his macros, and exercises compulsively, he isn't typically flagged for an eating disorder.
Right. People just say, oh, he's so dedicated.
Precisely. He's praised for his discipline. And that camouflage really extends to athletes, too, especially those in weight class sports like wrestling.
Or aesthetic sports, right?
Yeah.
Like gymnastics or diving.
Yeah, they are at a highly elevated risk. Yet, because their extreme dietary control is basically sanctioned by the sport, they're rarely screened for the psychological distress underneath it all.
Wow. That makes so much sense, but it's terrifying.
And on top of that, transgender and non-binary teens are at a massive risk. They often use food restriction to alter secondary sex characteristics or manage intense gender dysphoria, yet they remain almost entirely invisible to clinical attention.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this leads to what might be the biggest misconception of all. The idea that you have to, look sick to actually be sick.
Yes, this is crucial.
The data highlights a diagnosis called atypical anorexia. And this is defined as severe restriction without the patient dropping into an underweight body status.
Right.
And here's the kicker. Atypical anorexia is now the most common eating disorder presentation in adolescents.
I always tell people to just let that sink in for a moment. The most common presentation doesn't even involve the patient looking dangerously thin.
It's wild. Relying on weight-based screening to catch an eating disorder is, well, it's like judging a car's engine health solely by looking at its paint job.
That's a perfect way to visualize it.
It's absurd, right? You're completely ignoring the internal mechanics, the catastrophic failure happening under the hood, just because the outside still looks shiny and fine.
What's fascinating here is that the medical criteria must fundamentally focus on the behavior pattern, not the number on the scale, because the starvation response in the body is exactly the same, regardless of the starting weight.
Wait, really? So what does that actually look like biologically? If they aren't underweight, what is the body doing?
Well, the body panics. It slows down the metabolism to conserve energy. It starts breaking down muscle tissue for fuel. And remember, the heart is a muscle.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about that.
Yeah, we see patients with atypical anorexia presenting with bradycardia, which is dangerously low heart rates, and orthostatic hypotension, where they just pass out when they stand up, plus severe bone density loss.
But they're experiencing the exact same cognitive distress as someone with classic anorexia too, right?
Exactly. But because their body size doesn't drop below this somewhat arbitrary clinical threshold, the medical system, parents, teachers, they often just assume the engine is running fine.
So they get blood work done. Maybe their vital signs are a little weird, but the doctor looks at the BMI chart and says, well, they're in a normal range, so keep doing what you're doing.
That happens constantly, and the damage compounding internally is catastrophic. Meanwhile, the patient is literally being praised for losing weight.
If the consequences of missing this are so fatal, we really need to talk about the urgency. We've established who is actually suffering, but I want to dive into why brushing this off as a phase or just, a kid being a perfectionist is such a massive error.
It is arguably the most fatal error a parent or clinician can make. The data is totally unequivocal here. Eating disorders carry the highest mortality rate of any mental illness.
The highest, period.
Yes.
That is a chilling reality check.
They are an active medical and psychiatric emergency. And the tragic reality is that untreated eating disorders, they don't magically resolve with time. They persist, they worsen, and the medical complications just compound each year.
And there's a very specific, crucial window for intervention mentioned in the research. Recovery rates are dramatically higher when treatment begins within the first 3 years of illness.
Right.
And since this condition peaks in adolescence, typically between the ages of 14 and 19, that 3-year window is closing rapidly while these kids are just sitting in middle or high school classrooms.
The urgency really is paramount. And to act within that window, we have to understand the psychological reality. They are not a willpower issue, and they aren't just about vanity or control.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here, though.
Go for it.
If my teenager is just incredibly stressed about finals, going through a bad breakup, and suddenly wants to strictly control their diet, my instinct isn't immediately psychiatric emergency. My instinct is, well, they are overwhelmed and blowing off steam by controlling the one thing they can.
Sure.
So how do I know when I'm supposed to step in versus just letting them run their own show for a bit to regain some autonomy? Doesn't it feel counterintuitive to step in with rigid boundaries?
That is such a common, completely understandable parental instinct,
Yeah.
but it's based on a flawed premise of what's actually driving the behavior. Eating disorders are deeply biological and psychological.
Okay.
We see extremely high rates of co-occurring anxiety, depression, OCD, and trauma. Starvation actually alters brain chemistry. It exacerbates anxiety and rigid thinking.
So it's not just a stubborn teenager digging their heels in to get through exams?
Not at all. Because of that co-occurring trauma and the intense anxiety loop, leaving the teen to run their own show actually means abandoning them to the illness. The disorder is what's running the show, not the child.
Oh, I see.
So the proven formula for recovery is specialty treatment combined with loving boundaries. You can't just step back. You have to step in and disrupt that neurological loop.
That makes a lot of sense from a neurological standpoint. But, stepping in is terrifying for adults. If a parent or a coach notices this behavior, there's this paralyzing fear that bringing it up will somehow make it worse.
Ah, the old myth of giving them ideas.
I hear that all the time. It feels so similar to the old debates around drug safety education in the 90s. There's this pervasive idea that if you talk to your middle schooler about drugs, you're somehow planting the seed.
Right, which we know isn't true.
Exactly. Ignoring the danger doesn't protect the kids. It just leaves them to navigate a deadly complex situation completely alone without any guidance.
Silence is what allows the disorder to thrive in the dark. The research is perfectly clear here. You will not give them the idea. If they are exhibiting the behaviors, they already have the idea.
And the sources show that direct, calm, non-judgmental conversation initiated by a caring adult is actually one of the strongest predictors of a teen ultimately seeking treatment.
Yes, but this raises an important question about how adults communicate. Approaching the topic calmly and without judgment is key. You don't focus on the food or the weight. You focus on their mood, their isolation, their anxiety.
Right, look at the engine, not the paint job.
Exactly. But beyond the conversation itself, adults need an actionable tool. You can't just have a heavy conversation with a teenager and then have nowhere to go with that information.
Which brings us to a specific screening tool that's making a massive difference. It's a 2-minute eating concerns screening. You can find it at spacingtherapy.com, Compenal Health Tests.
What is it about this specific tool that makes it so much more effective than, say, traditional screening methods?
A few critical things, actually. First, it's totally free and entirely private. You don't even have to enter an email address to get your results.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah, it removes a massive barrier for nervous parents or teens who are afraid of being tracked or put on a mailing list. But second, and honestly most importantly, it captures behavioral and cognitive risk completely independent of BMI.
That is the game changer right there.
Yeah.
How does it manage to bypass the weight bias we talked about earlier?
Well, it looks at the psychology. Instead of asking, how much do you weigh, it asks questions aimed at the cognitive distress. Things like, do you feel intense guilt or shame after eating?
Right.
Or, are you making rigid rules about food that interfere with your ability to socialize?
It's looking for the mental prison the disorder creates, not the physical size.
Exactly. And it provides instant scoring with referral guidance. It gives the parent, the school counselor, or the coach an immediate objective next step.
Which is so needed.
Yeah.
Because once you've had that calm conversation, you need a medically sound metric to rely on. But of course, identifying the problem is really only half the battle.
Right.
The next, often more daunting hurdle is access to care.
And this is where the logistics usually fall apart. Let's say a school nurse uses that screening tool and sees a severe cognitive concern. They need an ecosystem designed to catch these kids where they actually spend most of their time.
And they spend their time in school.
Exactly. Which flows directly into the systemic solution rolling out in Georgia right now. Here's where it gets really interesting. It's called MentalSpace School.
This K-12 mental health support model is just a fascinating approach to solving the logistical nightmare of specialized care.
It's so much more than a reactionary crisis hotline. It is a proactive, holistic web of support integrated directly into Georgia schools. You can find them at mentalspaceschool.com.
And what exactly are they providing on the ground?
We are talking about same-day teletherapy. They have
Cool.
dedicated therapy teams assigned to specific schools so the kids see the same faces. They handle crisis intervention, suicide and violence prevention, family counseling, and they even do staff wellness for the teachers.
The inclusion of staff wellness and family counseling is a massive differentiator. It recognizes that treating a student in a vacuum just doesn't work.
Right, because they go right back to the same environment.
Exactly. If the family system is stressed or the teachers are burning out and missing those subtle signs of atypical anorexia, the student is going to relapse. You have to support the entire ecosystem around the child.
And the therapists they employ are licensed, diverse, and culturally competent, which is so crucial when we remember our earlier point. This isn't just a rich white teenage girl issue.
No, not at all.
A transgender teen in a rural county needs a therapist who understands gender dysphoria. A male athlete needs someone who understands the pressures of sports culture. You need a diverse array of professionals to connect with a diverse student body.
That brings up a critical point about geography and economics, too. Specialty eating disorder care, and really specialized mental health care in general, is notoriously expensive and difficult to access.
Oh, it's a massive bottleneck.
Yeah.
If you live outside of a major city like Atlanta, finding a specialist can literally mean driving 3 hours each way.
Exactly. In rural counties in Georgia, in-person specialty care for eating disorders is practically non-existent. MentalSpace School solves this by bringing specialty telehealth directly into the school environment. A student can literally go to the nurse's office, log onto a secure tablet, and have a session with a specialist. And MentalSpace coordinates directly with the student's medical providers, like their pediatrician, when integrated care is needed. For monitoring things like that bradycardia we talked about.
But the part that really blew my mind is how they've tackled the financial barrier. They accept major commercial insurance in Georgia, which is great. But crucially, for students on Medicaid, the cost is $0.
$0. I mean, that completely changes the landscape of mental health intervention.
It really does.
By removing the financial barrier and delivering care directly to the student via teletherapy, which, by the way, is fully compliant with HIPAA and FERPA, meaning all medical and student privacy laws are strictly protected. They are aggressively shortening the timeline to treatment.
They are actively hitting that vital 3-year recovery window we talked about earlier. Instead of waiting 6 months on a waiting list for a clinic 3 towns over, the kid is getting care the same day.
Precisely. If early intervention is the strongest predictor of recovery, MentalSpace is fundamentally designed to compress the time between a teacher noticing a behavioral change and a specialist intervening.
And the outcomes prove that it works. The data shows schools using this model see 89% improved attendance, 92% reduced anxiety, and 85% family satisfaction.
Those numbers make perfect sense when you think about the cognitive load of an eating disorder or severe anxiety.
Oh, for sure.
When a student is no longer spending 90% of their brain power obsessing over food rules or navigating trauma, they actually have the cognitive bandwidth to attend class and learn.
There's an administrative urgency to this right now, too. We are sitting here in April 2026, and there is a major legislative deadline fast approaching in Georgia. MentalSpace School actually helps districts comply with HB 268.
Right, and for those who might not follow state education policy, HB 268 is a state mandate requiring specific mental health support structures to be operational in schools.
And the deadline for compliance is July 2026, so the regulatory clock is ticking loudly. For school nurses, district mental health coordinators, and pediatric primary care providers listening to this, the infrastructure to meet this mandate is already built, and it's available right now.
It's an incredibly practical solution to a mandate that is otherwise very difficult for under-resourced districts to meet on their own.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, let's just crystallize the core takeaways here. Early intervention is the absolute most critical factor in treating adolescent eating disorders. We have to stop looking for the visual stereotype. We must shift our focus from the bathroom scale to the behavioral patterns happening in a teenager's mind.
And we have to abandon the myths that keep us silent and paralyzed. Eating disorders are not a phase. They are not about a teenager just trying to exert willpower. And they absolutely do not just affect one type of person.
And most importantly, whether you're a parent, a coach, or an educator, you don't have to navigate this alone. The actionable tools are there. That 2-minute BMI independent screening at chasetherapy.com is ready to use today. And systemic resources like MentalSpace School are making specialty, culturally competent care, including those $0 Medicaid options, accessible across Georgia right now to ensure no student slips through the cracks.
But I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. Based on everything we've unpacked today, we learned that atypical anorexia, severe restriction without being underweight, is now the most common presentation in teens. And we know that traditional weight-based screening completely misses it.
Right.
So how might our broader societal praise for weight loss and getting healthy actually be camouflaging the deadliest mental illness? Are we, as a culture, accidentally applauding the very emergency behaviors that require immediate medical intervention?
Man, it really makes you rethink every transformation post you see on social media. We're so trained to look for the broken bone on the x-ray that we might be cheering while the internal damage is compounding. Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. Take care of yourselves, and don't wait to have the conversation.